You're listening to the Alpha's love stories, romantic audiobooks that will make your heart race. Don't forget to subscribe for more enchanting love tales. Chapter 1. The Scar of Rejection. The wind didn't just blow, it screamed. It screamed of ice and isolation, a perfect mirror to the storm raging within Alara's soul. 3 days. It had been 3 days since her world had been ripped out from under her. 3 days since the pack gathering, since the sea of faces, since the moment Bryson's voice, cold and clear as shattering glass, had pronounced her sentence. I, Bryson Silvermane, reject you, Alara Mosswood, as my mate. The words were a brand, seared not just into her memory, but into her very spirit. The mate bond, a fragile, hopeful thread she had felt since her first shift, had snapped. The recoil was a physical agony, a constant, hollow ache in her chest that made every breath a struggle. She had understood, even then. That was the most painful part. Understanding didn't lessen the hurt, it just made it more profound. Bryson was the rising star of the Stonefall pack, the Beta's son, destined for a legacy of power. And she? She was Alara Mosswood, an Omega. From a family of gardeners and storytellers, with no political ties, no formidable strength, nothing to offer an ambitious alpha but a loyal heart. And in their world, a heart was worthless currency. The pitying glances, the hidden smirks, she had endured them all as she packed the meager remnants of her life. She left before dawn, a ghost slipping away from the only home she had ever known. It was better this way. To disappear into the wild, unclaimed territories than to remain a living reminder of a rejected destiny, a stain on Bryson's perfect future. Now, lost in the neutral lands between pack borders, the theoretical escape had become a brutal reality. A deep, gnawing fear began to set in, colder than the biting wind. The snow had begun as a gentle dusting but had quickly escalated into a howling blizzard, a white void that swallowed sound and hope alike. Her fingers were numb, her body trembling from cold and the lingering shock of the broken bond. She stumbled upon a shallow cave, little more than a scrape in the mountainside, and huddled inside. With trembling hands, she managed to coax a tiny, sputtering fire to life from the last of her kindling. The flames were a feeble defense against the encroaching cold, both outside and in. As she watched the snow pile up at the cave's entrance, a terrifying thought, dark and seductive, whispered in her mind. Maybe it would be easier, maybe it would be a mercy to just close her eyes and let the cold take her. What was there to go back to? What was there to move forward for? The life of an Omega was one. Of service, but a rejected Omega? She was nothing, a phantom. Just as exhaustion began to pull her towards a sleep she knew she might not wake from, a sound pierced through the wind's mournful howl. Her entire body went still, every sense straining. It was a whimper, faint, strained, and filled with a pain so profound it cut through her own despair. It was the sound of a creature in its final moments. A part of her, the part that was tired and broken, begged her to stay put. To ignore it. Her own survival was hanging by a thread, she had nothing left to give. But another part, the core of who she was, the part that Bryson's rejection had not been able to kill, stirred. It was the part that could not ignore suffering. With a heavy sigh that felt like it carried the weight of her entire shattered life, she pushed herself to her feet and stepped back out into the blinding, frozen hell. The snow lashed at her face like 1,000 tiny knives. She could see nothing but a wall of white. She pushed forward, the desperate sound her only guide. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and fading strength. Just as she was about to turn back, convinced she had imagined it all, she stumbled over something large and solid hidden beneath a drift of snow. She fell to her knees, her hands scrambling to clear the ice away. And then her breath caught in her throat, stolen by the wind and by sheer disbelief. It was a wolf, but unlike any wolf she had ever seen. He was colossal, his form radiating a latent power that made her Omega spirit whimper and want to curl into a ball. Even near death, he was magnificent. His fur was a tapestry of stormy gray and charcoal, thick and meant for royalty, but now it was matted and crusted with dark, frozen blood. Terrible wounds, deep and vicious, marred his flank and shoulder. They were claw marks, but on a scale that spoke of a battle with something monstrous. His chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged breaths. He was dying, right here, in the snow, alone. Just like her. A wave of compassion, so fierce and sudden it brought fresh tears to her eyes, washed over her. Her own pain was forgotten, eclipsed by the monumental tragedy before her. "Oh, great moon," she whispered, her voice cracking. She reached out a hesitant hand, her fingers gently brushing the thick fur of his neck. "What happened to you? Who could have done this?" At her touch, the wolf's eyes fluttered open. And Alara felt the world tilt. His eyes were not the eyes of a mere beast. They were the color of ancient amber, intelligent and aware, burning with a fierce, regal light even through a haze of unimaginable pain. They fixed on her, and in their depths, she saw not an animal, but a person. A soul. And in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them, a recognition of shared suffering. Her resolve solidified, turning to iron. "I'm going to help you," she declared, her voice gaining a strength she hadn't felt in days. It was a foolish promise. She had almost nothing, but she would not let this magnificent creature die alone. "Just hold on. Please, just hold on for me." Getting him back to the cave was a trial that bordered on the impossible. He was impossibly heavy, a dead weight against her small frame. She pulled and pushed, her muscles screaming in protest, her breath coming in ragged sobs that froze in the air. It was a journey of inches, fueled by a desperation she didn't know she still possessed. By the time she managed to drag him into the relative shelter of the cave, she was drenched, trembling, and on the verge of collapse. But she didn't rest. She fell to her knees beside him, her hands immediately going to the worst of his wounds. She used the last of her clean water and the remnants of her spare tunic to clean the gashes, her touch as gentle as she could make it. She packed the deeper wounds with clean snow to numb them and slow the bleeding, her mind racing through every half-remembered lesson on healing her mother had ever shared. All the while, she talked to him. The words poured out of her, a river of confession she had dammed up for days. "You're going to be okay," she murmured, her voice a soft, steady rhythm against the howl of the storm. "I won't let you die. I know what it feels like. I know what it feels like to want to give up. To feel like the world has no place for you. But you have to fight. Do you hear me? You have to live." She told him everything. About Bryson. About the public humiliation. About the crushing understanding that she was not enough. He said the words, and my whole world just ended. "And the worst part is, I can't even hate him for it. He's destined for greatness. And I'm just me. An omega with nothing to offer but a heart that no one seems to want." The wolf's amber eyes never left her face. He made soft, rumbling sounds in his throat, not of threat, but of acknowledgement. As if he were listening, truly listening, and disagreeing with every harsh word she spoke about herself. The empathy she saw in his gaze was her undoing. A single, hot tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek, then another. She cried as she worked, her tears falling onto his fur, mingling with the snow and blood. She cried for her broken bond, for her shattered future, and for this beautiful, dying king of beasts she was desperately trying to save. She worked through the night, a solitary sentinel against the darkness. The fire dwindled, and the cold crept back in, but she refused to stop. Several times, his breathing grew so faint she was sure she had lost him. Each time, she would lean close, her lips near his ear, and beg. "Please, don't you leave me. Don't you dare leave me alone here. Fight. Please, fight." And each time, as if he heard her command from some deep, hidden well of strength, his chest would rise with a deeper breath, and the light in his amber eyes would flicker back to life. As the long, terrible night finally began to wane, and a pale, gray light filtered into the cave, Alara slumped against the stone wall, utterly spent. She looked at the wolf, who was now sleeping more peacefully, his wounds clean and bandaged as best she could manage. A strange, quiet peace settled over her. The hollow ache in her chest was still there, but it was different now. It was no longer a void of despair, but a space filled with a new, fragile purpose. She had saved him, or at least, she had tried. In saving him, a tiny, fragile part of her own broken spirit had begun to mend. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know the power he wielded or the destiny that awaited them both. All she knew was that in the heart of a blizzard, a rejected omega and a dying wolf had found each other. And as the first true rays of dawn finally broke through the clouds, the world outside began to quiet. But the silence that fell was soon broken by a new sound. Distant, but growing closer. The sound of voices. Many voices. And they were heading straight for her cave. Chapter 2. The King's Awakening. The voices cut through the dawn's fragile peace like a pack of hunting hounds. They were sharp, organized, and carried on the wind with a purpose that made Alara's blood run cold. Her head snapped up from where she'd been dozing against the cave wall. Every instinct, honed by a lifetime as an Omega, screamed at her to make herself small, to hide. A gathering of wolves this large, moving with such coordinated intensity, could only mean one thing. A powerful pack was on the hunt. And she was a rogue, a trespasser in the neutral lands, huddled in a cave with a wolf who clearly was not ordinary. Her eyes flew to the massive, slumbering form beside her. His pack. It had to be. A wave of pure, undiluted fear washed over her. What if they thought she had hurt him? What if they saw her dirty hands and her makeshift bandages and assumed she was the one who had caused these terrible wounds? A rejected Omega found with a dying, noble wolf. The story wrote itself, and it ended with her being torn to pieces. She scrambled to his side, her hand gently shaking his uninjured shoulder. "Wake up," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. "Your pack? I think your pack is here. You need to wake up. You need to tell them I didn't do this." The wolf's amber eyes opened slowly. There was no disorientation in them, only a deep, weary awareness. He looked at her, and in his gaze, she saw not alarm, but a profound, unsettling calm. And something else, something that looked like regret. It was a look that stopped her frantic whispers cold. It was the look of someone who knew a secret he was sorry to reveal. "Your pack is here," she repeated, her voice barely a breath. You should let them know you're alive before they." Her words died in her throat. The air in the small cave began to change. It grew thick, charged with a static energy that made the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. A low, resonant hum filled the space, vibrating deep in her bones. The massive wolf's form began to shimmer, not like a mirage, but like heat rising from sun-baked stone. The outline of his powerful body wavered, and a brilliant, golden light erupted from his core, so bright Alara had to throw a hand up to shield her eyes. It was not the simple, fluid shift of a common pack wolf. This was a transformation of pure power. The cave walls seemed to tremble with the force of it. The very essence of the wolf was being rewritten, reshaped by a will of unimaginable strength. The light coalesced, shrank, and then faded. Where the colossal wolf had lain, a man now sat, leaning heavily against the cave wall. Alara's breath hitched. He was formidable. Even slumped in exhaustion, pale from blood loss and wrapped in her crude bandages, he commanded the very air around him. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a strength in his frame that her makeshift clothing could not conceal. His hair was the same stormy gray as his wolf's fur, shot through with strands of charcoal. His jaw was strong, his features carved with a harsh, regal beauty. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the same ancient, intelligent amber, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that stripped away all her defenses. "Who are you?" she whispered, the question a trembling exhale. But a part of her, the Omega part that recognized its alpha, already knew. The man's voice, when he spoke, was rough from pain and disuse, but it carried a weight of authority that resonated in her soul. "My name is Kaelin," he said, and the name felt like a key turning in a lock deep inside her. Kaelin Stormcrest. He paused, his gaze never leaving hers, letting the significance of the name hang in the air between them. "I am the Alpha King of the Northern Territories." The world tilted on its axis. The Alpha King. The most powerful wolf in all the realms. The wolf she had touched, and bandaged, and cried over. The wolf she had confessed all her deepest shames to. A wave of dizzying horror washed over her. She had been giving orders to a king. She scrambled backward, her movements jerky with panic. "Your Majesty, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have. My hands. I touched you without permission? I spoke to you so informally?" The words tumbled out, a frantic, apologetic river. She was an Omega who had overstepped in the most profound way imaginable. "Alara." He said her name, and it was not a command, but an anchor. The way he spoke it, with a familiarity and a warmth that belied his station, stopped her retreat. "You saved my life. His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. You spent the entire night fighting for me when I had given up. You asked for nothing. There is nothing to apologize for. Ever. But your majesty, the shout came from the cave entrance, and suddenly the small space was filled with wolves in human form. They were all tall, powerful, and moved with the lethal grace of seasoned warriors. Their eyes, wide with relief and shock, swept over the scene. A tall, fierce-looking woman with a scar tracing her jawline stepped forward, her gaze instantly assessing the king's condition before snapping to Alara. Your Majesty, thank the moon, the woman breathed. We've been searching all night. Your injuries. Kalen, the king, did not look away from Alara. I was ambushed. A dozen rogues, waiting in the pass. They used silver-tipped claws. I took down half, but the rest left me for the blizzard. He finally turned his head toward his guards. I would have died if not for this woman. This Omega. She found me. She brought me here. She has not slept, has not rested, fighting all night to keep my heart beating. Every eye in the cave turned to Alara. She felt their gazes like physical weights, pressing her down. She saw the gratitude, the shock, and the lingering suspicion in their stares. She was an unknown variable, a rogue in their king's presence. The tall female guard, whom Alara would later know as Commander Lyra, was the first to voice the unspoken question. She is a rogue, Lyra stated, her tone not hostile, but deeply cautious. Alone in the neutral territories. She bears no pack scent. Why would a lone wolf risk everything for a stranger? It was the question Alara had been asking herself all night. Because, Kalen's voice cut through, soft but absolute, she possesses a compassion that transcends pack law and personal survival. Look at her, Lyra. She is half dead from cold and exhaustion herself, yet her first concern was for a creature she believed to be a simple, wounded animal. Alara watched the exchange, her heart pounding. Kalen was defending her. The king was defending her. He tried to push himself up, a grimace of pain twisting his features. Instinctively, without a single thought for protocol, Alara darted forward, slipping her shoulder under his arm to support his weight. You mustn't, she insisted, her healer's instincts overriding her terror. The wounds are too deep. If you tear them open now, all my work will be for nothing. You need to rest. A strange, almost amused silence fell over the guards. But Kalen did not shrug her off. He leaned on her, and a small, tired smile touched his lips. You see, he said to his stunned commander. She gives orders to a king without a second thought. I find I don't mind it. Lyra's stern expression softened by a fraction. She gave a slow, respectful nod to Alara. The healer speaks wisdom, Your Majesty. We must get you back to the palace, but carefully. First, Kalen said, his attention returning fully to Alara, who was still supporting him, we address the matter of my rescuer. Your Majesty, Alara began, her voice small, now that you're safe? I should go. You don't need me anymore. The words felt hollow even as she said them. Where would she go? No. The single word was not a shout, but it was layered with such finality that it felt like a law of nature. You are not going anywhere. But I'm just a rogue. What I need, he interrupted, his voice dropping, becoming more intimate, is to speak with the woman who saved my life. The woman who told a dying wolf that she understood what it was to want to give up. He paused, and the air grew thick with unspoken meaning. The guards had gone preternaturally still. You were rejected, Kalen continued, and Alara flinched at the words spoken aloud in this company. 3 days ago, by an alpha named Bryson Silvermane of the Stonefall Pack. Heat flooded Alara's cheeks. Shame burned through her. He remembered everything. He had been conscious for all her tearful, pathetic confessions. How do you know that? She stammered. Because you told me, he said, his gaze holding hers, refusing to let her look away from the truth. You trusted me with your pain when you thought I was no one. And I want you to know this, Alara. I want you to hear it clearly. Bryson Silvermane is a fool. Alara's eyes widened. The guards exchanged stunned glances. Any alpha, Kalen's voice grew stronger, filled with a conviction that vibrated in the very stone of the cave, who would reject an omega with your compassion, your strength, your selfless heart. An alpha who cannot see the infinite value in a spirit like yours is too blind to be worthy of the title. His rejection was not a reflection of your worth, Alara. It was a glaring indictment of his own lack of character. The words were a bomb and a brand all at once. They soothed the raw, aching wound of Bryson's betrayal, yet they burned with an intensity that was almost too much to bear. No one had ever spoken of her that way. No one had ever looked at her as if she were precious. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, welled in her eyes and spilled over. She tried to wipe them away, but they kept coming. "Don't," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please don't. I'm not used to such kindness. Not after he made you believe you were worthless?" Kalen finished for her, his voice gentle yet fierce. "Well, you must get used to it. Because I have a great deal more to say. And it begins with this." He took a slow, deliberate breath, and the entire world seemed to hold its breath with him. "Last night, as you fought for my life, as you poured your own strength into mine, something happened, Alara. A new bond formed between us. The silence in the cave was absolute. You could have heard a snowflake land." Alara stared at him, her mind refusing to process the words. The female guard, Lyra, looked as if she'd been struck by lightning. "That's impossible," Alara breathed. "The bond with Bryson was a pale imitation," Kalen stated, his amber eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "The moon goddess does not make mistakes, Alara. If Bryson could reject you, it is because you were never truly his. Your soul was never meant to be bound to his. It was waiting for me." The truth of it slammed into her, not as a thought, but as a feeling. A deep, resonant hum that had been growing in her chest all night, a warmth she had mistaken for the fire, a connection she had attributed to shared suffering. It was there, a golden, vibrant thread connecting her heart to his. It was real. It was undeniable. "But you're the king," she protested, her voice a thin thread of sound. You can't be mated to a rejected Omega. The scandal, your council, the other packs, they would never accept it. You need a queen of strength and lineage, not me." "You are strength," he countered, his voice dropping to a fervent whisper. "You have a strength that has nothing to do with physical power and everything to do with the quality of your spirit. You walked away from your home to give your rejector peace. You faced a blizzard to save a stranger. That is not weakness, Alara. That is a power I have spent a century searching for in a mate." He reached out then, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. His fingers gently brushed a stray tear from her cheek. The contact was electric. The bond between them flared, bright and warm and solid, weaving itself more tightly into the fabric of her being. Commander Lyra stepped forward again, her earlier suspicion completely gone, replaced by a look of awe. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For 50 years, I have served you. In all that time, I have never seen you look at anyone the way you are looking at this Omega now. If the moon goddess has chosen her, then she is the queen we have been waiting for." Lyra then turned to Alara and, to Alara's utter show, CK bowed deeply. "My lady," she said, her voice resonating with respect. "I apologize for my suspicion. Any wolf who would save our king, who would show such courage and compassion, has my unwavering loyalty." The other guards followed her lead, bowing their heads in a silent, powerful gesture of acceptance. Alara looked from their bowed heads to Kalen's unwavering, earnest face. She felt the truth of the mate bond, a beautiful, terrifying, and magnificent reality. The rejected Omega was not just a savior. She was chosen. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her world spinning. Kalen's hand found hers, his grip firm and sure. "You don't have to say anything yet," he said. "The choice is yours, Alara. It will always be yours." Chapter 3. The weight of a crown. The journey away from the cave was a blur of swirling snow and overwhelming sensation. Alara sat atop a sturdy, dark-coated wolf, one of Kalen's guards, her fingers tangled in the thick fur for balance. Kalen himself was carried on a litter fashioned from branches and cloaks, his immense strength finally succumbing to the toll of his injuries. Yet, even in repose, his presence was a palpable force. His amber eyes, though heavy with exhaustion, would find hers every few moments, a silent check-in, a steady anchor in her sea of turmoil. The king's words echoed in her mind, a relentless, beautiful, terrifying mantra. "You are my mate. The choice is yours." How could such a choice even exist? It felt like being asked to hold a star in her hands, a luminous, impossible gift that she was certain to drop. She, Alara Mosswood, was the fated mate of the Alpha King. The concept was so absurd her mind kept shying away from it, like a wounded animal from a bright light. Her gaze drifted over the procession. These wolves moved with a disciplined, powerful grace she had never seen in the Stonefall pack. They were larger, their eyes sharper, their silence more profound. These were the warriors of the High King. And they were now, according to their commander, her warriors. The thought sent a fresh jolt of panic through her. She didn't know how to command respect, she only knew how to offer silent service. The landscape began to change. The deep, untamed snows of the neutral territories gave way to a path that was clearly maintained, flanked by ancient, towering pines whose branches were heavily laden with white. Sentinel wolves emerged from the shadows to bow their heads as the king's party passed, their eyes widening in shock and curiosity when they fell upon Alara. She felt their gazes like pinpricks on her skin. The story was spreading already. The Rogue Omega, the king's savior, his mate. As dusk began to paint the sky in shades of violet and deep blue, they crested a final rise. Alara's breath caught in her throat, and a small, involuntary sound escaped her lips. There, nestled in a protected valley against a sheer mountain face, was the Northern Palace. It was not merely a building, it was a part of the mountain itself, carved from pale, moon-kissed stone that seemed to glow with an inner light. Towers spiraled towards the sky, their peaks lost in the low-hanging clouds. It was majestic, imposing, and utterly terrifying. A wave of dizziness washed over her. "It's too much," she whispered, the words torn from her by the sight. She looked down at herself, at her travel-worn, blood-stained clothes, at her chapped hands and wind-burned face. "I can't possibly belong here. Look at me. I'm nobody." Kalen, who had been watching her, shifted on his litter. His voice, though weak, carried a strength that brooked no argument. "You are mine," he said, the words simple and absolute. "And that makes you somebody very important to every soul who resides within those walls." He paused, his gaze softening as he took in her palpable fear. "But if this is too overwhelming, we do not have to go there. I have a cabin, deep in the silent woods. It is small, and simple, and quiet. We could go there instead. We could have time away from all of this grandeur and expectation." The offer was a lifeline. A chance to hide, to process this seismic shift in the safety of obscurity. It was so tempting. To run away with him, just the two of them, and forget about palaces and crowns and the judging eyes of an entire kingdom. For a long moment, she was silent, wrestling with the fear that clawed at her throat. But then she thought of Bryson. She thought of the pity in his eyes when he'd rejected her. She thought of the whispers that had followed her out of Stonefall. Running away now would feel like confirming every single one of those whispers. It would be admitting that she wasn't enough. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the cold air stinging her lungs. She straightened her shoulders, a gesture that felt foreign and fragile. "No," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. "If I am going to consider being your mate, I need to see what that life truly means. No running away, no hiding. I need to face this, head on." A look of pure, unadulterated pride flashed in Kalen's weary eyes. "You continue to amaze me," he said softly. "You are braver than any warrior in my guard." As they passed through the immense, intricately carved gates of the palace, the reality of his world descended upon her. The courtyard was vast, lined with wolves in formal attire. Staff, warriors, and courtiers all stood in respectful silence, their heads bowed as their king was carried through. But their eyes, full of curiosity and assessment, were fixed on her. Kalen never left. To her side, his presence a solid wall between her and the overwhelming attention. He introduced her not as a rescued rogue, but with a quiet, unwavering authority. "This is Alara," he would say, his voice carrying through the crisp air. "My mate. The one who saved my life." The reactions were a mixture of shock, disbelief, and cautious respect. But no one dared to voice a word of dissent in their king's presence. An elderly wolf, his back stooped but his eyes sharp and intelligent, stepped forward, leaning heavily on a staff of polished oak. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "Thank the great wolf you have returned to us safely." The council was preparing for the worst. Elder Corvus, Kalen greeted him, a note of respect in his tone. Your concern is noted. I am well, thanks to this remarkable Omega. She fought for my life when I had no fight left in me. The elder's gaze, ancient and penetrating, shifted to Alara. She felt it like a physical weight, measuring her worth, judging her every flaw. She braced herself for the subtle disdain, the polite dismissal she had known her entire life. Instead, Elder Corvus's stern expression did not change, but he inclined his head to her, a slow, deliberate gesture that held the weight of tradition. Then we are all in your debt, young lady, he intoned, his voice grave. Welcome to the Northern Palace. The words were simple, but the meaning behind them was monumental. It was not a full acceptance, but it was a door being held open. It was more than she had ever received from her own pack. The rooms she was given were a world away from the shallow cave. They were a suite, larger than the entire Omega quarters in Stonefall. A massive bed piled with furs and silks dominated one chamber, while a fireplace large enough to stand in crackled merrily in another. The windows were vast panes of glass overlooking the breathtaking, snow-capped mountains. It was a space fit for a queen, and it made her feel like an imposter. She stood frozen in the center of the sitting room, still wrapped in her dirty traveling cloak, feeling more out of place than she had in the blizzard. Kaelin, supported by Lyra, stood at the doorway. This is too much, Alara whispered, her voice small in the cavernous room. It is exactly what you deserve, he corrected gently, his own exhaustion evident in the shadows under his eyes. And remember, you are under no obligation. This is a place for you to rest and recover. To think. Nothing more. He gestured to a trio of quiet, efficient-looking she-wolves who had entered behind him. These attendants will see to your needs. Let the healers check you over. Eat. Sleep. We will talk when you are ready. After he left, the silence of the room pressed in on her. The attendants approached, their movements graceful and subdued. My lady, one of them said, her voice soft. Shall we draw you a bath? Alara simply nodded, unable to form words. She allowed herself to be led into an adjoining bathing chamber where a sunken tub was already filling with steaming, herb-scented water. They helped her out of her ragged clothes, and she saw the flicker of pity in their eyes as they took in the thinness of her frame, the lingering tremors from cold and shock. But there was no judgment, only a quiet, professional compassion. When she was finally alone, submerged in the hot, fragrant water, the dam broke. Sobs racked her body, silent and violent. They were not tears of sadness, nor purely of joy. They were tears of sheer, overwhelming release. The terror of the blizzard, the agony of Bryson's rejection, the shock of finding Kaelin, the miracle of saving him, the earth-shattering revelation of the mate bond, and the terrifying prospect of a crown, it all came pouring out. She cried until the water grew cool and her body was limp with exhaustion. As she lay there, spent, a single, clear thought emerged from the chaos. She was afraid. Deeply, fundamentally afraid. But for the first time in 3 days, she was not hopeless. The hollow ache of rejection was still there, but it was now filled with the bewildering, golden warmth of a new bond. A bond with a king who saw not an Omega but a woman. A man who had offered her a cabin in the woods to protect her from the burden of his crown. And as she climbed out of the bath and was wrapped in a robe softer than any fabric she had ever touched, Alara Mosswood made a decision. She would not run. She would face this strange, terrifying, magnificent new world. One trembling step at a time. Chapter 4. The first threads of trust. The first few days in the Northern Palace passed in a hazy, surreal dream. Alara's suite became both a sanctuary and a gilded cage. The sheer luxury was overwhelming. The softest furs, the most exquisite foods, the silent, efficient service. Every comfort was designed to make her feel like royalty, yet each one only heightened her feeling of being an imposter. She was a moss-covered stone placed upon a velvet cushion, utterly out of place. Her sleep was fractured, haunted by the echoing words of Bryson's rejection, now tangled with the piercing amber gaze of Kaelin. She would wake with a start, the phantom pain of the severed bond a cold ache in her chest, only to feel the new, golden thread of connection to the king humming with a warm, steady pulse. It was a constant, confusing war within her spirit, the old wound and the new promise. True to his word, Kaelin gave her space. He did not demand her presence or pressure her for an answer. But he was not absent. His presence was felt. in subtle, thoughtful ways. On the first morning, a selection of fine, warm gowns appeared, not in the flamboyant colors of court, but in soft shades of forest green, sky blue, and warm gray, colors that reminded her of home, of the woods. They were beautiful, yet practical and modest. There was no ostentation in the gift, only a deep understanding of what might bring her comfort. Later that day, a quiet knock announced his arrival. He stood at her doorway, leaning less heavily on a carved walking stick, his color better though he still moved with a warrior's caution. "I wondered if you would join me for the midday meal," he asked, his tone leaving every option open for refusal. "There is a small solarium that catches the sun. It's less formal than the Great Hall." She had agreed, her heart thumping a nervous rhythm. The solarium was indeed less formal, filled with winter-blooming plants and bathed in weak, golden sunlight. The meal was simple: roasted fowl, hearty bread, spiced wine. He did not speak of mate bonds or kingdoms. Instead, he asked her questions. What plants grew in the lowland forests of her pack? What stories had her mother told her of the old times? He listened, truly listened, to her hesitant answers, his intelligent eyes following her every expression. She found herself, to her own astonishment, speaking of her mother's knowledge of healing herbs, of the way the light fell through the canopy in the Stonefall woods, of simple, happy memories from a time before she had presented as an omega and her world had shrunk. He, in turn, shared little things. The name of the fierce little bird that nested outside his window every spring. The way the northern lights painted the sky in winter. It was not a courtship of grand gestures, but one of quiet discovery. On the second day, he took her on a slow walk through a sheltered part of the palace gardens, the paths meticulously cleared of snow. He pointed out the dormant rose bushes, telling her they bloomed a deep, blood red in the summer. He showed her the kennels where the palace's messenger wolves were kept, magnificent creatures who nudged her hand with surprising gentleness. He introduced her to the head gardener, an old, gnarled wolf who smelled of earth and bark, and who spoke to her of soils and seasons with a passion that made her feel instantly at home. Every wolf they met, from the lowest scullery maid to the highest-ranking guard, was treated with the same measured respect by their king. And in turn, they looked at Alara not with the disdain she expected, but with a burgeoning curiosity and a dawning sense of reverence. They saw the way their king looked at her, not with possession, but with a kind of quiet awe. It was on the third day that the first true test came. Kaelin had ed her to his private study, a room lined with books and maps, smelling of leather and pine smoke. He was showing her a beautifully illustrated text on the constellations when the door opened without a knock. Commander Lyra entered, her face a mask of grim urgency. "Your Majesty, a report from the eastern border. A skirmish with a rogue band." They were unusually organized. Kaelin's relaxed posture vanished, replaced by the rigid focus of a commander. "Casualties? Minor. Our patrol drove them off. But they carried this." Lyra placed a small, cloth-wrapped object on the table. Unwrapping it, she revealed a dagger. Its blade was crude, but the hilt was carved with a symbol that made Kaelin's jaw tighten. A serpent coiled around a shattered crown. Alara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft from the door. The symbol was one of rebellion, of contempt for the monarchy. Kaelin's gaze lifted from the dagger to Alara. The warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, hard light she had never seen. This was the Alpha King, the warrior, the ruler who bore the weight of a kingdom. "Double the patrols along the entire eastern range," he commanded, his voice low and lethal. "I want to know who is arming them. I want to know where they are getting their orders." "Yes, Your Majesty." Lyra's eyes flickered to Alara for a fraction of a second, a silent question about her presence during such a sensitive discussion. Kaelin did not dismiss her. Instead, he turned his attention back to the map on his desk, his finger tracing a line along the border. "They are testing our strength, probing for weakness." He said it calmly, but the implication hung in the air. His injury, his disappearance, it had been noticed. It had created an opening. Alara stood silently, watching him. She saw the burden settle back onto his shoulders, the mantle of kingship that was as much a part of him as his wolf. He was not just the wounded creature she had nursed back to health. He was the shield that protected thousands. The reality of his world, a world of politics, borders, and hidden knives, crashed down upon her. This was the life he was offering her. A life not just of luxury, but of constant vigilance and danger. After Lyra left, the room was thick with silence. Kalen leaned heavily on the table, the brief exertion clearly costing him. He looked tired, the shadows under his eyes deepening. "You see," he said quietly, without looking at her. "This is the reality. It is not all sunlit solariums and quiet gardens. There are always threats in the shadows, always those who seek to tear down what we have built." He finally met her gaze, and the vulnerability she saw there was more shocking than any display of power. "This is the life I am asking you to share. A life where a simple walk in the woods can be a political statement, where an enemy can see a mate as the perfect target to break a king." Alara's heart ached for him. In that moment, she did not see a king, but a man who shouldered a loneliness so immense she could scarcely comprehend it. Her omega nature, the part of her that yearned to soothe and protect, surged forward, overpowering her fear. She took a tentative step toward the desk. "A shield is strongest," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "when it has something truly precious to guard." Kalen went very still. His eyes searched her face, the hard planes of his expression softening into something raw and unguarded. No one had ever spoken to him of his duty in such a way. It was always about his strength, his power, his authority. Never about the value of what he protected. "Alara," he began, but seemed to have no words. "I may not know about borders or politics," she continued, gaining a sliver of courage. "And the thought of anyone wanting to hurt you, or use me to get to you, it terrifies me. But I understand loyalty. I understand what it means to stand by someone." She looked down at her hands, then back up at him, meeting his amber gaze squarely. "I am still afraid, but I am not afraid of you." It was the most honest thing she had said to him since their bond had been revealed. The tension in the room shifted, the cold dread of the rebel threat melting away, replaced by a new, profound understanding. A slow, genuine smile, the first she had seen since the cave, touched Kalen's lips. It transformed his entire face, easing the weight of kingship and revealing the man beneath. "Then that," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is all I could ever ask for." In the quiet of the study, with the shadow of a rebellion on the horizon, the first true thread of trust was woven between them. It was not the passionate claiming of a mate bond, but something deeper, more resilient. It was the quiet agreement to face the storm together, whatever form it might take. And for Alara, the gilded cage of the palace felt, for the first time, a little less like a prison and a little more like the threshold of a home. Chapter 5. The shadow of the past. The fragile peace Alara had begun to build shattered on the fourth morning. The news came not with a shout, but with a hushed, frantic whisper from her attendant, Anya. "My lady," the young she-wolf breathed, her eyes wide, "a delegation has arrived." From the Stonefall pack. Alara's heart plummeted, a cold stone sinking into the pit of her stomach. The spoon she held clattered against her breakfast bowl. The Stonefall pack. Bryson's pack. Her former pack. A wave of nausea washed over her, so potent she had to grip the edge of the table. Why were they here? It couldn't be a coincidence. Had they heard? Had Bryson come to what? Gloat? Reclaim her? The possibilities were all terrifying. She spent the morning in a state of paralyzed dread, hiding in her rooms. She paced the luxurious carpets, her mind conjuring every terrible scenario. Bryson's cold, dismissive eyes. The sneers of the pack members who had watched her humiliation. She was no longer the anonymous rogue in a cave. She was Alara of the Northern Palace, and the ghosts of her past had found her. Her plan was simple: stay hidden. Avoid the corridors, refuse any summons. Let the delegation conduct their business and leave without ever knowing she was here. She could not face him. Not yet. The wound was still too raw, the new bond with Kalen too delicate to withstand the poison of that memory. But fate, it seemed, was not on her side. In the afternoon, desperate for a breath of air that didn't smell of her own fear, she slipped out into a secluded courtyard garden, a place of dormant rose bushes and frost-rimmed statues she had come to think of as her own. For a few precious minutes, she felt a semblance of calm, the cold air cleansing her frantic thoughts. It was then that she heard the voice. A voice that had haunted her dreams for nights on end. "Alara?" She froze, her back to the speaker, every muscle locking in place. Slowly, as if moving through deep water, she turned. Bryson Silvermane stood at the archway of the courtyard. He looked just as she remembered, proud, handsome, with the confident posture of a born leader. But there was something new in his expression as he looked at her. Not the cold finality of rejection, but a complex swirl of shock, confusion, and something that looked unsettlingly like dawning regret. He took a step forward, his eyes scanning her from head to toe, taking in the fine, warm gown, the simple but elegant braid in her hair, the healthy color returning to her cheeks. She was not the broken, disheveled Omega he had cast out. "Alara," he said again, his voice softer now, almost wondering. "I heard rumors, but I didn't believe them. Is it true? You are the one who saved the Alpha King?" She could only nod, her throat too tight to form words. The mate bond inside her, the golden thread connecting her to Kaelin, flared with a protective, possessive heat, a stark contrast to the icy dread Bryson's presence invoked. He took another step, closing the distance between them. His gaze was intense, probing. "And the other rumor, that he has claimed you as his mate? Is that also true?" The question felt like a violation. "That is none of your concern," she managed to whisper, finding a sliver of the strength Kaelin had seen in her. Bryson's composure cracked. A flash of something ugly, possessiveness, jealousy, crossed his face. "None of my concern? Alara, I was you were nothing." The new voice cut through the garden, cold and sharp as a shard of winter ice. It did not shout, but it carried an authority that silenced the very birds in the trees. Both of them turned. Kaelin stood at the courtyard entrance. He was not leaning on his walking stick. He stood tall and straight, his immense frame seeming to fill the archway. His expression was not one of rage, but of a chilling, absolute calm. It was the face of a king passing judgment. The air around him crackled with a dominance so potent it pressed down on them, a physical weight. Bryson actually staggered back a step, his face paling. "Your Majesty," he stammered, his own alpha presence withering into insignificance. "I was merely apologizing?" Kaelin interrupted, his tone deceptively soft. "Explaining why you publicly shamed and rejected a gift from the moon goddess. Or perhaps you were here to beg for forgiveness for your monumental stupidity?" He took a single step forward, and Bryson flinched as if struck. "Your Majesty, I didn't realize." Bryson tried again, his voice strained under the crushing weight of Kaelin's power. "Finish that sentence," Kaelin said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper, "and I will personally ensure the Stonefall Pack spends the next decade regretting the day you were born." Alara watched, her heart hammering against her ribs, as the Alpha who had broken her was forced to his knees not by violence, but by the sheer, overwhelming force of Kaelin's will. Bryson dropped, one hand braced on the frozen ground, unable to look up. Kaelin's gaze never left Bryson's kneeling form, but his next words were for Alara. "Alara is my mate, my future queen, the most precious and valuable wolf in this entire kingdom." Each word was a hammer blow, driving the final nail into the coffin of her old life. "And you rejected her because you were too blind, too obsessed with political advantage, to recognize the worth of a diamond when it was handed to you." The vindication was so powerful it stole her breath. This was not the quiet, private reassurance he had given her in the cave. This was a public declaration, a king using his absolute authority to not just defend her, but to elevate her, to shatter the very foundation of Bryson's rejection in front of the ghosts of her past. "I'm sorry," Bryson gasped, the words ripped from him. "You thought status mattered more than character," Kaelin finished, his voice dripping with contempt. "And in doing so, you proved yourself unworthy of the breath in your lungs, let alone the mate the moon goddess tried to give you." He finally shifted his gaze, his eyes finding Alara's. The cold fury in them melted away, replaced by a fierce, protective warmth. "Now get out of my sight. Your presence is an offense to my mate and to this court." Bryson scrambled to his feet and fled, his pride in tatters, without a single backward glance. The other members of the Stonefall delegation, who had been watching from a discreet distance, vanished after him. The moment they were gone, the terrifying aura of the Alpha King vanished. Kaelin was at her side in an instant, his hands gently gripping her arms, his eyes searching hers. "Alara, are you all right? I am so sorry you had to face him. If I had known he was in that delegation, I would have kept you far away from here." Tears were streaming down her face, but they were not tears of pain or fear. They were tears of release. Of a poison being drawn from a wound she thought would never heal. She looked up at him, at this powerful, fearsome king who had just laid waste to her tormentor with nothing but words, and she saw only concern for her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for defending me. For making him see, for making me see." She broke off, sobbing, but this time, she did not try to hide it. He pulled her gently into his arms, and she went willingly, burying her face in the soft fabric of his tunic. He held her as she cried, his hand a steady, comforting pressure on her back. "You were never the problem," he murmured into her hair, his voice a low, soothing rumble. His rejection had nothing to do with your worth, and everything to do with his own profound lack of vision. "You are precious, Alara. To me, to the moon goddess, to anyone with the sense to see the magnificent strength of your heart." As she stood there, sheltered in the embrace of the Alpha King, the last of the chains Bryson had placed on her spirit finally fell away. The shame was gone, burned to ashes by the fire of Kalen's defense. The fear was receding, replaced by a dawning, unshakable certainty. When her tears finally subsided, she pulled back just enough to look up at his face. The words she had been too afraid to fully embrace now rose to her lips, clear and sure. "I want to accept," she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "The mate bond. I want to accept you as my mate." Hope, bright and fierce, blazed in Kalen's amber eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked, his own voice hushed with emotion. "You don't have to decide because of what just happened. Take all the time you need." "I don't need more time," she said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time since Bryson's name had been spoken. "I've spent these days watching you be patient, and kind, and respectful. You've shown me what it means to be truly valued. I'm still scared of being a queen. I'm still healing. But I want to do it with you. I choose you, Kalen. I choose us." The smile that spread across his face was more radiant than the sun on the palace snow. It was a king's smile, yes, but more importantly, it was the smile of a man who had been given his heart's desire. "Thank you," he whispered, pulling her close again, his embrace saying everything words could not. "Thank you for being brave enough to trust me. I swear to you, I will spend every day of my life ensuring that your trust is deserved." In the quiet of the courtyard, with the shadow of her past finally banished, Alara Mosswood accepted her future. And for the first time, it felt not like a burden, but like a destiny she was ready to claim. Chapter 6. The vow before the moon. The days that followed Alara's acceptance were a whirlwind of quiet, purposeful activity. A new energy seemed to flow through the northern palace, a tangible shift from wary anticipation to vibrant celebration. The official announcement of their mating was met with a wave of genuine joy that surprised Alara. It seemed Kalen's unwavering respect for her had paved the way for his people's acceptance. They saw not a rejected Omega, but the savior of their king, the woman who had brought a light back to his eyes they had not seen in years. Elder Corvus himself, the stern council elder, came to her one afternoon. He did not speak of politics or lineage. Instead, he placed a gnarled hand over his heart and gave a slow, deep bow. "The bond is blessed by the moon," he stated, his voice raspy but firm. "The king's spirit has found its anchor. The pack is strengthened. Welcome, Lady Alara. Truly welcome." His words, more than any other, solidified her place. The final barrier of doubt within the court had crumbled. Kalen, true to his nature, involved her in every decision. The mating ceremony was to be a sacred, pack-wide event, but he insisted it reflect her as much as him. "This is not just my ceremony," he told her as they pored over sketches in his study. "It is ours. Tell me what would make you feel comfortable. Tell me what would make it feel true." And so, she did. She asked for the ceremony to be held in the great stone circle in the palace gardens, under the open sky, close to the earth. She requested that the scents of pine and winterberry be used instead of heavy perfumes. She chose a gown not of glittering silk, but of heavy, cream-colored velvet, embroidered with silver thread in patterns reminiscent of frost and forest vines. It was regal, yet deeply connected to the world she loved. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and bitterly cold. The air was so still the snow-laden branches did not tremble. The entire pack, it seemed, had gathered in and around the stone circle, their breaths pluming in the air, their faces alight with anticipation. Alara stood at the edge of the circle, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She could feel the weight of thousands of eyes upon her. Then, she saw him. Kalen stood across the circle, waiting for her. He was dressed in the formal black and silver of the Stormcrest line, a heavy fur-trimmed cloak draped over his broad shoulders. But his gaze, fixed solely on her, held none of the coldness of a king. It was warm, earnest, and filled with a love so profound it stole her breath. All her fear melted away, replaced by a certainty so deep it felt like it had been carved into her bones. The pack's head elder, an ancient she-wolf with eyes like milky quartz, raised her hands to the sky. A hush fell, so complete the only sound was the whisper of the wind. "Children of the moon," the elder's voice rang out, clear and strong. "We gather under her watchful eye to witness the sacred joining of two souls. To witness the binding of our Alpha King, Kalen Stormcrest, to his fated mate, Alara." Alara began to walk towards him. Her steps were steady, her head high. She did not look at the crowd. She kept her eyes locked with his, drawing strength from the golden bond that hummed between them, brighter and more powerful than ever before. She reached his side. He offered her his hands, and she placed hers in his. His grip was firm, warm, a silent promise. The elder spoke the ancient vows, her voice weaving a spell of tradition and magic around them. "Do you, Kalen, Alpha King, vow to honor this bond? To protect your mate's spirit as you protect your kingdom? To cherish her strength, to respect her will, and to walk beside her as your equal until the moon calls you home?" Kalen's voice was deep and resonant, carrying to the farthest corners of the gathering. "I so vow. Before the moon, before my pack, and before you, Alara. My heart, my soul, my life are yours." The elder turned to her. "And do you, Alara, vow to honor this bond? To strengthen your mate's spirit as you strengthen your pack? To offer your compassion, to share your courage, and to walk beside him as his equal until the moon calls you home?" Alara took a deep breath. Her voice, when it came, was clear and strong, surprising even herself. "I so vow. Before the moon, before this pack, and before you, Kalen. My heart, my soul, my life are yours." A soft, collective sigh rippled through the crowd. "Then by the power of the great moon, and by the will of your own spirits, let this bond be sealed," the elder proclaimed. Kalen gently tightened his grip on her hands. He did not kiss her. Instead, he leaned forward until his forehead rested against hers, a gesture of profound intimacy and respect. In that moment, as their skin touched and their breath mingled, the mate bond flared into its final, unbreakable form. A wave of pure, golden energy erupted from them, visible. Is a shimmering light that danced through the air, washing over the assembled pack. A wave of warmth, peace, and powerful magic swept through the stone circle. Wolves gasped, some shedding tears of joy, as they felt the rightness, the absolute perfection of the union. It was done. A great cheer erupted, not a roar of conquest, but a joyful, thunderous celebration that seemed to shake the very mountains. Drums began to beat, a deep, primal rhythm that called to the wolf in every heart. Kalen finally pulled back, his eyes shining. He kept hold of one of her hands and turned to face his people, raising their joined hands high. "My people," he called out, his voice booming with pride and happiness. "I give you your queen, Alara Stormcrest." The cheer that followed was deafening. Long live the king! Long live the queen! The feast that night was a grand, vibrant affair. Alara sat at Kalen's side at the high table, no longer feeling like an imposter. The title of queen was still daunting, but the role of Kalen's mate felt as natural as breathing. He spoke with his commanders, laughed with the elders, and throughout it all, his hand would find hers under the table, a constant, reassuring presence. Later, as the stars glittered like diamonds in the cold night sky, they walked together through the quiet gardens, the sounds of the celebration a distant hum. "It feels like a dream," Alara murmured, leaning slightly into his side. "A beautiful, impossible dream." "It is our reality," Kalen said, his voice soft. "And it is only the beginning." He stopped and turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "The challenges we spoke of have not vanished. The rebels are still out there. The weight of the crown is still heavy. But facing it with you by my side, it feels like a burden I can not only bear, but triumph over." Alara looked out over the moonlit palace, her palace, and the vast, sleeping territory beyond. The rejected Omega was gone. In her place stood a queen, mated to a king who saw her not for what she lacked, but for the strength she possessed. She had found her destiny not in the shadow of a rejection, but in the light of a sacred vow. "I am not afraid," she said, and for the first time, she knew it was the complete truth. He smiled, a slow, proud smile. "Neither am I." Hand in hand, the Alpha King and his Omega Queen stood together under the moon, their bond a brilliant, unbreakable thread in the tapestry of the night, ready to face the dawn of their new reign. Chapter 7. The Echoes of a Crown. The title of Queen was a heavy, exquisite cloak that Alara was still learning to wear. In the week following the ceremony, her life became a structured chaos of introductions, lessons, and quiet moments of overwhelming doubt. The initial wave of celebratory joy had receded, leaving behind the stark, beautiful, and terrifying reality of her new station. Her days began at dawn with Lyra, who had been formally appointed as her head of security and, unofficially, her guide to the intricate dance of court life. The fierce commander was a patient but unyielding teacher. "This is Lord Valerius," Lyra would state, her voice low as they observed the courtiers gathering in the great hall for morning audience. "His family controls the iron mines in the southern range. He will bow and call you, Your Grace. He will also be assessing your every word, looking for any sign of weakness to report to his allies." Alara's head spun. It was not enough to be kind, or compassionate. Every gesture, every word, was a piece on a political game board she had never learned to play. A misplaced smile could be seen as favoritism, a moment of hesitation as indecision. The simple honesty she had always lived by felt like a liability here. Her afternoons were spent with Elder Corvus, who schooled her in pack law and history. He spoke of treaties and border disputes, of blood feuds that spanned generations, of the delicate balance of power among the noble families. The stories were not dry tales from a book. They were the living, breathing foundations of Kaelin's kingdom, and now, her own. "The Stormcrest line has held the northern throne for 3 centuries, Corvus intoned, his finger tracing a lineage on a vast parchment. Not through brute force alone, but through alliance, through wisdom, and through the unwavering strength of the mate bond. The king's grandfather ended the War of the Howling Crags not on the battlefield, but by marrying the daughter of his most powerful enemy. The bond brought peace where thousands of claws could not." Alara listened, her heart growing heavier with each lesson. She was not the daughter of a powerful enemy. She was a gardener's daughter from a lowland pack. What alliance did she bring? What political advantage did her bond offer? The old insecurities, which had been silenced by Kaelin's love, began to whisper to her again in the silent, dusty library. She saw the burden Kaelin carried. He was no longer just the man who walked with her in the gardens. He was the final arbiter of justice, the strategist for his armies, the diplomat who held a fractious coalition of alphas together. He would often retire to his study after their evening meal, his brow furrowed over maps and reports. The easy smiles he shared with her were becoming rarer, replaced by a look of deep, preoccupied thought. One evening, she brought him a cup of tea, finding him as she often did, surrounded by scrolls. He looked up, and the weariness in his eyes was a physical pain in her heart. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked softly, placing the cup before him. He managed a tired smile. "You are doing it. Your presence is a comfort." But it didn't feel like enough. A comfort was passive. A queen, she was learning, needed to be active. She needed to be a partner. The opportunity to prove this, in the most subtle of ways, came during a public audience. A dispute between 2 merchant families was brought before the throne. It was a complex argument over trading rights, filled with accusations of stolen routes and breached contracts. Alara sat in the smaller throne beside Kaelin's, listening intently. The facts were a tangled knot, but she focused not on the legalities, but on the people. She watched the way one merchant's eyes darted away when he spoke of his profits. She saw the genuine, desperate frustration in the other's wife's face. Kaelin listened to both sides, his expression impassive. The court waited for his judgment. He was about to speak, to deliver a ruling that would likely be fair but would leave one family resentful, when Alara, acting on pure instinct, leaned over and whispered a single, quiet sentence in his ear. "The daughter of the second family is promised to the son of the first," she murmured. "A union set for the spring." Kalen paused. He had the facts of the trade dispute, but he had missed the human connection, the thread of a future that bound these two families together. He looked at Alara, a spark of surprise and admiration in his tired eyes. He turned back to the petitioners. "Your dispute is valid," he declared, his voice echoing in the hall. "But I see a greater opportunity than a simple ruling. You are to be joined by blood. A feud between you is a wound you inflict upon your own future grandchildren." He then proposed a compromise, a shared route with jointly monitored profits, a solution that wove their futures together instead of tearing them apart. It was a brilliant diplomatic move. The families, shamed and enlightened, agreed. The court murmured in approval, impressed by the king's wisdom. But Kalen, as the petitioners bowed and retreated, turned to Alara. "You saw what I did not," he said, his voice for her ears only. "I was looking at the law. You were looking at their hearts." In that moment, Alara understood. Her value was not in reciting pack law or knowing the lineage of every noble house. Her strength was the very thing she had believed made her weak, her compassion, her ability to see the hidden threads that connected people. She could read the truth in a flicker of an eye, in the tension of a shoulder. She could see the forest where others saw only trees. That night, as they walked in their now customary silence through the moonlit gardens, the weight of the crown felt different. It was still heavy, but it no longer felt like it was crushing her. It felt like a responsibility she was growing into. "You were magnificent today," Kalen said, breaking the quiet. "I only whispered a piece of gossip," she replied modestly. "You offered a piece of truth that changed the course of a ruling," he corrected. "That is not gossip. That is wisdom. That is what a queen does." He stopped and took both her hands in his. "I have spent my life learning to rule with strength. You are teaching me how to rule with heart. Do not ever believe that what you bring to this throne is insignificant, Alara. It is the one thing it has been missing for a very, very long time." The last of the whispering doubts within her fell silent. She was not just a mate who comforted him in private. She was his queen, his partner, and her unique strength was now an official, vital part of his reign. The echoes of her crown were no longer just a sound of dread, but the beginning of a new, harmonious rhythm for the entire kingdom. Chapter 8. The whispers of rebellion. The peace that had settled over the northern palace was a fragile veneer, and it shattered one evening with the arrival of a bloodied and breathless scout. Alara was in the library, attempting to memorize the sigils of the major noble houses, when the urgent summons came from the war room. She entered to find a scene of grim intensity. Kalen stood over a large table map, his knuckles white where they gripped the edge. Lyra and several senior commanders were gathered around, their faces like carved stone. The scout, a young wolf with a hastily bandaged arm, was pointing a trembling finger at a location deep in the ironwood, a dense and treacherous forest on the eastern border. "They were waiting for us, Your Majesty," the scout rasped. It was no rogue band. They were disciplined. They used coordinated attacks. They knew the terrain. The symbol? Kalen's voice was dangerously calm. The serpent and the shattered crown. Carried on their banners. A cold dread, different from the personal fear she had felt with Bryson, seeped into Alara's bones. This was a threat not to her heart, but to her home, to the man she loved, to the people who had accepted her. Kalen's gaze swept over his commanders. "They are no longer just testing us. They are organized. They have a leader, a base, and a purpose." His eyes finally lifted and met Alara's across the room. In them, she saw the Alpha King fully awakened, the strategist, the warrior, the protector. "This ends now. We find their nest, and we cut off the head of this serpent." Plans were laid with a brutal efficiency that was both terrifying and reassuring. Patrols were doubled and tripled. Elite trackers were dispatched to the ironwood. The atmosphere in the palace grew taut, a bowstring pulled back. And ready to fire. The easy companionship she had found with Kalen was replaced by brief, intense exchanges. He was often absent, training with his guards or locked in council. Alara felt a profound sense of uselessness. She was the queen, but what good was her ability to read emotions against an enemy who hid in shadows? She attended the councils, sitting silently by Kalen's side, listening to the reports of missing patrols, sabotaged supply lines, and the growing boldness of the rebels. It was during one of these councils that a noble, Lord Valerius, the one Lyra had warned her about, spoke up. "Your Majesty," he said, his tone dripping with false concern. "These are dangerous times. The rebels grow bolder by the day. Perhaps it would be wise for the Queen to retire to the summer palace in the west until this threat is neutralized. For her own safety, of course." The suggestion was a carefully veiled insult. It implied she was a liability, a fragile object to be stored away. A few other nobles murmured their agreement. Alara's cheeks burned, but she kept her head high, her eyes fixed on Kaelin. Kaelin's response was immediate and icy. "The Queen's place is at my side, Lord Valerius. Her safety, and the safety of this entire kingdom, is my foremost concern. She is a stormcrest. We do not hide from shadows." Though defended, the words stung. She was being protected, again. She was a symbol to be guarded, not a partner to contribute. That night, unable to sleep, she wandered down to the palace kitchens, a place that always smelled of baking bread and herbs, a comforting echo of her old life. The kitchen staff, initially startled, soon welcomed her, used to her quiet visits. She found Anya, her attendant, speaking in hushed, frightened tones with a young cook. "My cousin is in the Eastern Patrol," the cook was saying, wringing her hands on her apron. "He says the rebels, they aren't just fighting. They're spreading lies. He heard them shouting that the king is weak, that his bond with a low-born Omega has broken the moon's favor. They say the kingdom is vulnerable because his judgment is clouded." The words hit Alara like a physical blow. This was the rebels' true weapon. Not just claws and teeth, but poison. And she was the heart of their propaganda. Her very existence was being used as a tool to undermine Kaelin's authority. A cold resolve solidified within her. She would not be a liability. She would not be a symbol to be protected. She would find a way to fight back. The next day, she went to Lyra not as a student, but as a queen. "I need to understand our enemy, Commander. Not just their numbers, but their minds. What do they want? Who follows them? Are they all fanatics, or are some simply frightened, misled wolves?" Lyra studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow, respectful nod. She brought Alara the interrogation reports of the few captured rebels. Most were tight-lipped and defiant, but Alara pored over every word, every noted gesture. She saw a pattern others had missed. The defiance was strongest in the city-born wolves, those who felt disenfranchised by the noble-led council. The fear was in the eyes of the farmers and hunters, those whose livelihoods had been disrupted by new trade laws Kaelin had implemented. She took her findings to Kaelin that evening. He was studying the map of the Ironwood, his expression grim. "They are not a monolith," she began, her voice steady. "You are hunting a beast with two heads. One head is filled with ambition and hatred for the crown. The other is simply afraid. They follow because they believe the stories that you no longer care for the common wolf." Kaelin looked up, his weariness replaced by keen interest. "Go on. The rebels in the cities, they are the true threat. But the others, they can be won back. The new tax on pelts, the redirected trade routes, these things hurt the small villages in the east. The rebels are offering them scraps and promises, preying on their fear." She placed a hand on the map, over the eastern territories. "You can cut the body off from one head, but if you do not win the heart back, another will grow in its place." Kaelin was silent for a long time, looking from the map to her, and back again. The strategy he had been pursuing was one of pure force. Find and destroy. Her strategy was one of division and reclamation. "You are right," he said finally, a new light in his eyes. It was the light of a king who had just been shown a path to true victory, not just a temporary peace. "We have been fighting the symptom, not the disease." He called for Lyra. "New orders. The next patrols to the eastern villages will not be warriors alone. They will be accompanied by healers and by scribes to hear grievances. They will carry supplies, not just weapons. And they will carry a message from their queen." Alara looked at him, surprised. "From me?" "Yes," Kaelin said, his voice firm. "They need to see you. Not as the low-born Omega of the rebels' lies, but as a queen who understands their struggles. Your compassion is not a weakness, Alara. It is the sharpest weapon we have. For the first time since the scout had arrived, Alara felt a surge of purpose. The whispers of rebellion had sought to use her as a pawn. But she would not be a pawn. She would be a queen, and she would fight for her people with the only weapon that had ever truly been hers, her heart. The battle for the kingdom had just begun, and she had found her place on the battlefield. Chapter 9. The Queen's Gambit. The War Room, once a place of gree. Strategy and talk of crushing force, now hummed with a different energy. Kalen's new orders had sent ripples through the palace. Instead of dispatching only armed patrols, caravans were being assembled, wagons laden with medicine, warm blankets, and sacks of grain, accompanied by healers, scribes, and a contingent of guards not for attack, but for protection. Alara stood beside Kalen as he addressed the captains chosen for this new mission. "You are not merely soldiers now," he told them, his voice carrying the weight of his crown. "You are the face of your queen's compassion. You will listen to every grievance, you will record every need. You will show the eastern territories that their king hears them, and that their queen fights for them." He then turned to Alara, his gaze expectant. All eyes in the room followed his. This was her moment. The message needed to come from her. She took a steadying breath, her heart pounding. She was not a warrior giving a rousing battle cry. She was a healer offering a balm. "Please," she began, her voice clear but gentle, "tell them they have not been forgotten. Tell them that the crown sees their hardship. The new trade routes were meant to bring prosperity to all, but if they cause suffering, then they will be amended. Their loyalty is not demanded, it is earned. And we will work to earn it anew." She paused, thinking of the frightened cook in the kitchen, of the farmers losing their livelihoods. "Tell them the serpent's lies whisper of a weak king. But a king who admits a fault and seeks to mend it is not weak. He is strong. And a kingdom that cares for its most vulnerable members is not vulnerable. It is unbreakable." A respectful silence filled the room. The captains, hardened warriors all, bowed their heads not just in obedience, but in genuine respect. They saw the strategy now. This was a different kind of warfare. The days that followed were an agony of waiting. Alara threw herself into her work, but her mind was always in the east. She reviewed the scrolls of law with Elder Corvus, now with a new purpose, looking for the specific edicts that had harmed the eastern villagers. She found them. A tax on pelts that had been meant to fund road repairs but had instead crippled the trappers, and a royal decree that had given a noble family a monopoly on the river trade, pushing out the local ferrymen. She brought these findings to Kalen, and without hesitation, he drafted proclamations to repeal and amend them. "A king must be able to change his mind when presented with new truth," he said, sealing the documents with his signet ring. "You have given me that truth." 2 weeks later, the first caravan returned. The captain, a grizzled veteran named Fenrir, came to the throne room to report. His demeanor was TRANS for med. The grim set of his jaw was gone, replaced by a look of profound revelation. "Your Majesties," he said, kneeling. The message was delivered. At first, there was suspicion. They thought it was a trick. But when our healers tended their sick, when we unloaded the supplies, when we read the Queen's words. He shook his head, as if he could still scarcely believe it. The fear in their eyes, it faded. "We heard confessions. They told us of the rebels who came in the night, threatening their families if they did not offer food and shelter. They gave us names, locations." He unrolled a small, crude map. "We have the location of their main camp. Deep in the ironwood, here, in a place called the Serpent's Coil. It was given to us by a farmer whose son was taken by them." The air in the throne room crackled. This was the breakthrough they had been desperate for. The rebels' greatest advantage, the support of the local population, was crumbling. Kalen's strategy session that night was fierce and focused. With a confirmed location, they could plan a decisive strike. "It is still a dangerous mission," Lyra cautioned. "The coil is a natural fortress. They will be expecting an attack." "Then we must be unexpected," Kalen said, his eyes gleaming with strategic fire. He outlined a plan involving a diversionary force and a small, elite team that would infiltrate the camp from the rear, a near-vertical cliff face considered unscalable. As the commanders debated the details, Alara listened, her mind working. They spoke of soldiers, of tactics, of surprise. But they were still thinking only of the rebel warriors. She thought of the farmer's son. She thought of the other wolves who might have been forced into service, the ones who were simply afraid. When there was a lull in the conversation, she spoke. When you attack, what of the wolves who are there against their will? The ones who joined only to protect their families. The commanders looked at her. It was a question of sentiment, not of strategy. Kaelin, however, understood. What do you propose? Offer them a chance, she said. Before the attack begins, have your wolves howl a message of amnesty, that any wolf who lays down their arms and surrenders will be spared. That they will be given a fair trial and the chance to return to their homes. Give them a choice before you give them death. Silence fell. It was a risk. It would alert the camp. It could cost them the element of surprise. Lyra was the first to break it. It is a risk, she said, echoing Alara's own thought. But it could also save the lives of our own warriors. And it would prove, beyond any doubt, that we are not the tyrants the rebels claim us to be. Kaelin looked at Alara, his pride a tangible force in the room. We will do it. We will offer the Queen's mercy. He turned to his commanders. The howl for amnesty will be the signal for the attack. We fight, but we also save. That is the Stormcrest way. That is our Queen's way. The plan was set. The Queen's gambit, her strategy of compassion, had not only exposed the enemy's heart, but was now shaping the final, decisive blow. Alara had moved her piece on the board, not with a warrior's strength, but with a queen's wisdom. The battle for the kingdom would be won with claws and courage, but it would be defined by the mercy offered in the moonlight. Chapter 10. The Howl of Mercy. The night before the assault, a profound silence blanketed the northern palace. It was the quiet of held breath, of prayers whispered into the dark. Alara stood with Kaelin on the high balcony overlooking the training grounds, watching the elite team make their final preparations. They were a stark contrast to the supply caravans. These wolves were shadows and sharp edges, their faces set in masks of grim determination. Among them was Lyra, her form a coiled spring of lethal grace. Kaelin's hand found Alara's, his grip tight. The scouts confirm it. The camp is in the serpent's coil. Your information was correct. He said the words with pride, but she could feel the tension thrumming through him. This was his duty, the part of kingship that demanded blood. I wish I were going with you, she whispered, the words surprising her. It was not a wish for battle, but a desperate need to be there, to ensure her message of mercy was heard. Kaelin turned to her, his amber eyes serious in the moonlight. Your place is here, Alara. You are the heart of this kingdom. If this goes wrong, the people will need you. Your strength will hold them together. He cupped her face, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. The howl of mercy will ring through the coil because of you. Your spirit will be with us on that cliff face. His faith in her was a shield and a weight. She nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. She watched as he joined his warriors, shifting in a flash of brilliant light into his colossal, storm-furred wolf. With a final, lingering look in her direction, he led the silent, flowing river of shadows out of the palace gates and into the dark embrace of the forest. The wait was an eternity. Alara did not sleep. She paced her chambers, her mind trapped in the ironwood. She imagined the treacherous climb, the cold stone under claw, the silent approach. She imagined the moment before the howl. Would the rebels simply attack? Would they slaughter her mate the moment his voice echoed in the canyon? Dawn was painting the sky with pale, watery light when a distant sound reached the palace. It was not the sound of battle. It was a single, clear, powerful howl that sliced through the morning calm. It was Kaelin's voice, but it carried a message she had crafted. It was a sound of immense power, yet it spoke not of conquest, but of clemency. It was the howl of mercy. The signal. A few tense hours later, a messenger wolf, still in his animal form, came streaking into the courtyard, his sides heaving. Alara, who had been waiting in the throne room, rushed out to meet him. The wolf shifted, his face flushed with exertion and something else, something like awe. Your Grace, he panted, bowing deeply. A victory. The king is victorious, and he is returning. Relief so potent it made her knees weak washed over her. The casualties? She asked, her voice trembling. Far fewer than we feared, my lady. Far fewer. When Kaelin and his warriors returned, it was not the grim procession Alara had dreaded. They were weary, bloodied, but their heads were high. And they were not alone. Trailing behind them, surrounded but not bound, was a group of perhaps 24 wolves in human form. They looked young, frightened, and utterly bewildered. The forced conscripts. The farmer's son was among them, his eyes wide as he took in the splendor of the palace. Kalen walked straight to Alara, ignoring the courtiers and guards. His clothes were torn, a fresh cut marred his brow, but his eyes were alight with a fierce, triumphant fire. He took her hands in his. "It worked, Alara," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Your howl, it worked." He turned slightly, gesturing to the captured rebels. "When our cry echoed through the coil, it created chaos. But not the chaos of battle. The chaos of hope. These wolves, they dropped their weapons. They looked at their leaders, and they saw the fury in their eyes, and they chose mercy. It broke the rebel line before we even engaged." Lyra stepped forward, her armor spattered with mud but her expression one of deep respect. "The hardcore rebels, the leaders, they fought fiercely. They are captured or dealt with. But these," she gestured to the young wolves, "they surrendered. Because of your message, my queen. We lost 5 good warriors. We might have lost 50. The court, which had gathered in a hushed crowd, began to understand. They saw the surrendered rebels, they saw the minimal losses, and they saw the look of profound admiration on their king's face as he gazed at his queen. A ripple of applause started, soft at first, then growing into a thunderous ovation. It was not just for the military victory, but for the wisdom that had made it possible. Later, in the quiet of their chambers, Kalen told her the full story. The rebel leader, a disgraced noble from a fallen house, was enraged by the howl. He screamed that I was weak, that mercy was a flaw. But when he tried to rally his followers to slaughter the surrendering wolves, his own captains hesitated. Your mercy, Alara, divided them. It sowed doubt where there had been fanatical certainty. That was the moment we won. He reached out and traced the line of her jaw. You told me your strength was your compassion. Today, you proved it is a strength that can win wars. You saved countless lives on both sides of that conflict. You did not just help me reclaim a piece of territory, you helped me reclaim the soul of my kingdom. Alara looked at him, at this powerful, battle-hardened king who valued her gentle heart as his greatest weapon, and she felt the last vestiges of the rejected Omega finally, completely, fall away. She was not just his equal, in that moment, she was his guiding light. The rebellion was broken. The serpent's head had been severed. But as the kingdom celebrated, Alara knew their work was not done. The farmer's son and the others like him needed to be reintegrated, their wounds healed, their trust won. The queen's work of healing had only just begun. And for the first time, she faced that future not with fear, but with a steady, unshakable certainty. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Chapter 11. The scars we mend. The victory in the Ironwood was a turning point, but the true test of the crown began in its aftermath. The palace dungeons, once a place of grim silence, now held the captured rebel leaders. But it was the 24 surrendered conscripts, housed in a guarded but clean barracks near the palace, who became the focus of Alara's days. The war was over, the healing had to begin. She went to them the morning after the victory, against the advice of both Lyra and a concerned Kalen. They are frightened and confused, she insisted. Seeing their queen, seeing that I am real and not the monster from the stories, might be the first step toward peace. She entered the barracks alone, dressed in a simple, unadorned gown. The young wolves, most of them barely past their first shift, scrambled to their feet. Their fear was a thick scent in the air. They expected punishment, perhaps death. Alara did not sit on the chair that had been placed for her. Instead, she walked among them, her hands clasped gently in front of her. My name is Alara, she began, her voice soft. I know you have been told many things about me. That I am the cause of the king's weakness. That my bond has broken the moon's favor. She paused, meeting the eyes of a young she-wolf who couldn't have been more than 16. I was born an Omega in the Stonefall Pack. I know what it is to feel powerless. To be told you have no value. A few of them looked up, their expressions shifting from fear to shock. The queen was confessing her own low status? I was rejected by my fated mate because I had no political power to offer him. The admission hung in the air, stark and honest. I know the pain of being cast aside. So I understand, perhaps more than you know, why you might have been willing to listen to promises of a new order, one where your families would not struggle, where you would have a voice." She stopped before the farmer's son, a lanky boy named Ronan. "Your father is well, Ronan. He misses you. He was the one who gave us the map to find you." Tears welled in the boy's eyes and spilled over. "They said they would burn our farm if I didn't join," he choked out. "They said the king didn't care if we starved." "I know," Alara said, her voice filled with a profound empathy. "And for that, the king and I are deeply sorry. The laws that hurt your village have been repealed. The new trade routes are being renegotiated as we speak." She turned her gaze to encompass all of them. "You will not be punished for your actions. You were victims of fear and lies. You will be given a choice. You may return to your families with our blessing and a pledge of support to rebuild what was lost. Or, if you have no home to return to, you may swear a new oath to the crown and be given a place here, to train and serve in the palace guard or in other trades." The offer was so far beyond what any of them had dared to hope for that a stunned silence filled the room. It was not amnesty, it was redemption. One by one, they came forward. Some, like Ronan, chose to go home, their hearts yearning for familiar fields. Others, their families scattered or lost, knelt before her and pledged their loyalty to the queen who had offered them not a prison cell, but a future. Kalen watched this transformation from the doorway, his heart so full of pride it felt like it might burst. He had won the battle with strength, but Alara was winning the peace with a grace he could never possess. She was mending the tears in the kingdom's fabric, one thread at a time. The work with the rebel leaders was harder, and it fell to Kalen. They were bitter, entrenched in their hatred. But even here, Alara's influence was felt. Kalen did not have them executed outright. He offered them a public trial, a chance to speak their grievances before the entire court. It was a risk, allowing their poison to be aired, but Alara had convinced him. "Sunlight is the best disinfectant," she had said. "Let the pack hear their lies and see their hatred for what it is. The truth will stand against it." She was right. The trials were a spectacle, but they ultimately backfired on the rebels. Their arguments, stripped of the fear they had wielded in the shadows, sounded petty and selfish. The pack saw their king's fairness in allowing them to speak, and their queen's serene confidence as she sat beside him, unshaken by their vitriol. In the end, justice was served, but it was tempered with the mercy Alara had championed. The ringleaders were exiled, not executed, their lives spared but their influence permanently broken. Weeks turned into a month. The first buds of spring began to push through the thawing ground, mirroring the new growth in the kingdom. One evening, Alara and Kalen walked through the gardens, now coming alive with color. "It is done," Kalen said, his voice filled with a quiet contentment. "The rebellion is over. The kingdom is united in a way I have not seen in my entire reign." He stopped and turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "This is your doing, Alara. Your compassion was not a weakness to be protected. It was the missing piece, the cornerstone this throne needed. You saw the people where I saw only subjects. You saw wounds where I saw only disobedience." Alara looked around at the peaceful garden, at the palace that was now truly her home, at the man who was her partner in every sense of the word. The scars of the past, both his from the ambush and hers from the rejection, had not vanished. But they had healed, becoming not marks of shame, but reminders of the strength it had taken to overcome. "The scars are still there," she murmured, "but they no longer hurt. They remind us of what we survived, together." Kalen smiled, a true, easy smile that reached his eyes. "Together," he agreed. "Always." In the quiet of the twilight, with the first stars appearing overhead, the Alpha King and his Omega Queen stood hand in hand, their bond a quiet, steady flame. They had faced down shadows and whispers, and they had emerged not just victorious, but whole. The mending was complete, and the future stretched before them, bright and full of promise. Chapter 12. The first Queen's Council spring arrived in the Northern Territories not as a gentle thaw, but as a triumphant explosion of life. The snow retreated to reveal emerald green meadows, and the air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming night blooms. The palace, once a fortress huddled against the winter, threw its windows open to the warm, gentle breezes. With the rebellion a fading memory and the kingdom more unified than ever, Kalen decided it was time to formalize what had already become reality. He summoned Alara to the Great Council chamber, a room she had only entered a handful of times, always as a silent observer. Today, the long, oak table was surrounded by not only the usual stern-faced commanders and elders but also by new faces, the masters of the various guilds. The Growers' Guild, the Weavers' Guild, the Masons' Guild. Their presence was unusual, and a murmur of curiosity filled the room. Kalen stood at the head of the table, his presence command. In an immediate silence, "My lords, ladies, honored masters," he began, his voice ringing with authority. "We have faced threats from without and within, and we have emerged stronger. This strength comes not just from the might of our warriors, but from the unity of our people. It is a unity forged by a new kind of leadership." His gaze found Alara's, warm and proud. "For too long, this council has been a body that reacts to crises. It is time it became a body that nurtures prosperity. To that end, I am creating a new, permanent seat on this council. The Queen's seat." A ripple of surprise went through the room. Elders exchanged glances. Lord Valerius's lips tightened almost imperceptibly. "The Queen's seat," Kalen continued, "will have a specific focus, the welfare of the common wolf. It will oversee trade, agriculture, healing, and education. It will ensure that the laws we pass here do not harm the most vulnerable among us. And it will be occupied by the one person who has repeatedly proven her profound understanding of these matters, my mate, your queen, Alara." He gestured for her to take the empty seat to his immediate right. It was a place of supreme honor and power. For a moment, Alara felt the old fear, the whisper that she was an imposter. But as she looked at the expectant faces, the hopeful eyes of the guild masters, the cautious respect of the elders, the unwavering faith in Kalen's gaze, the fear quieted. She was not an Omega pretending to be a queen. She was the queen, and this was her duty. She took her seat, her back straight. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she said, her voice clear. "I am honored to serve the pack in this way." The first meeting of the new council was a revelation. The initial topic was the allocation of resources for the spring planting. The Treasury Minister, a pragmatic wolf named Finn, presented a plan that favored the large, established farms of the Western nobles, arguing they produced the most surplus. "It is a matter of efficiency, Your Grace," Finn said, nodding to Alara. Alara studied the scroll. "Efficiency for grain production, perhaps," she said calmly. "But what of the eastern valleys? Their soil is poorer, but they are the primary growers of the medicinal herbs our healers rely on. If we divert all resources to the west, we may have more bread, but we will have fewer poultices and potions when the next illness spreads. A kingdom's health is not measured in bushels of wheat alone." The head of the Growers' Guild, a weathered she-wolf named Maeve, looked at Alara with something akin to awe. No one on the council had ever considered the value of her small, scraggly herb gardens. Alara proposed a compromise, a tiered system of support that ensured the western farms could feed the population while also providing seeds, tools, and knowledge to the eastern herb growers to increase their yield. It was a plan that saw the whole kingdom as an interconnected body, not a collection of competing parts. Kalen watched her, his heart swelling. She was not just offering kindness, she was offering brilliant, practical strategy. She was thinking in terms of systems and sustainability, concepts the old council had often ignored. The next topic was education. Currently, only the children of nobles and high-ranking warriors were taught to read and write by private tutors. "A literate pack is a strong pack," Alara stated, a bold proposal. "How can a wolf follow new farming techniques if they cannot read the instructions? How can they understand the laws that govern them? I propose we establish a school here, at the palace. Not just for the high-born, but for any pup who shows promise, regardless of their status." This time, the opposition was vocal. Lord Valerius scoffed. "Your Grace means well, but to educate the common-born? It will only lead to discontent. They have their roles to play." Alara met his gaze evenly, her Omega spirit calm and unwavering. "A wolf who understands his role is a loyal subject. A wolf who understands why his role matters, and how it contributes to the whole, is a citizen. And a kingdom of citizens is unbreakable. Discontent does not come from knowledge, my lord. It comes from being kept in the dark." The debate that followed was heated, but Alara held her ground, her arguments rooted in the compassion and foresight that had already saved the kingdom. She spoke not of overturning the social order, but of strengthening it from the bottom up. In the end, Kalen, who had listened to the entire exchange in silence, gave his ruling. The Queen's reasoning is sound. The school will be established. We will start small, but we will start. As the council adjourned, the guild masters surrounded Alara, their faces alight with gratitude and new ideas. They had found a champion. The elders and nobles filed out more slowly, some thoughtful, some displeased, but all understanding that the balance of power in the room had irrevocably shifted. Later, alone with Kalen in their chambers, she let out a long, shaky breath. I was so nervous. He pulled her into an embrace, laughing softly. You were magnificent. You didn't just take a seat at the table, Alara. You changed the table. You made it longer, to include more voices. He kissed her forehead. That was your first Queen's Council. You have set a course for this kingdom that will echo for generations. Alara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. The rejected Omega was now a lawmaker, a visionary. Her journey had begun with saving a single life in a blizzard. Now, she was shaping the future of thousands. And she knew, with a certainty that filled her soul, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Chapter 13. The Seeds of Tomorrow. The school, which Alara had named the Moonlight Academy, began not in a grand building, but in a sun-drenched, repurposed conservatory on the palace grounds. The first class was a hesitant group of 20 pups, their ages ranging from 6 to 12. They were the children of guards, cooks, gardeners, and a few from the eastern villages who had shown a keen interest in their elders' herbal lore. They sat on simple woven mats, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. Alara did not stand on a dais. She sat among them, a slate board propped beside her. Good morning, she began, her voice warm. We are here to learn about the world. Not just the world outside these walls, but the world of ideas. We will start with the stories of our people. She did not begin with dry histories of battles and kings. She began with the legend of the first wolf and the moon, a story every pup knew, but she told it with a question. Why do you think the moon goddess gave us both a human heart and a wolf's spirit? A small girl, the daughter of a palace weaver, tentatively raised her hand. So we could understand different things? Exactly, Alara said, her smile encouraging. Our wolf understands the forest, the hunt, the pack. Our human heart understands love, and art, and the stories we are about to learn to write down. She taught them their letters by having them trace the shapes in the soft earth of the conservatory's planters. She taught them numbers using pebbles and seeds. The lessons were not a chore, but a game, a discovery. The children, who had been taught to be silent and obedient, slowly found their voices. Laughter began to echo under the glass roof. Kalen would often watch from the doorway, unseen. He saw the light in the children's eyes as they learned, and the radiant joy on Alara's face as she taught. He saw the daughter of a low-ranking guard confidently sound out a word, and the son of an eastern farmer proudly solve a arithmetic problem. He was not just seeing education, he was seeing the forging of a new generation, one that would be more united, more intelligent, and more loyal than any that had come before. The success of the school was the first seed. The second was the Queen's Garden. On a stretch of unused land within the palace walls, Alara, with the help of the old head gardener and any pack member who wished to join, began a new project. It was not a garden of decorative flowers, but a vast, organized plot of practical plants. There were sections for vegetables to supplement the palace kitchens, rows of berry bushes, and, most importantly, a large, carefully tended herb garden. Here, Maeve from the Growers Guild taught others the secrets of cultivating potent healing herbs. Palace healers held workshops on how to prepare poultices and teas. It became a living classroom, a community center, and a symbol of the Queen's philosophy, that strength comes from nurturing life. One afternoon, Alara was on her knees, showing a group of young she-wolves how to distinguish between similar-looking leaves, when a shadow fell over her. She looked up to see Elder Corvus, his gnarled hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. My queen, he said, his voice a low rumble. Elder Corvus, she replied, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek. Would you care to join us? We are learning about feverfew. To her surprise, the old wolf slowly lowered himself to kneel stiffly beside her in the soil. He picked a leaf, crushed it between his fingers, and inhaled its sharp scent. "My mother," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, "she knew these things. She was a healer in our village, long before I came to court." He looked at the thriving plants, at the eager faces of the young wolves, and then at Alara. This is a different kind of power, is it not? Not the power to command, but the power to empower. Alara nodded, her heart full. It is the only kind of power that grows when you give it away, elder. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, a look of deep respect in his ancient eyes. He did not stay long, but his visit was a silent, powerful endorsement that echoed through the court. The changes were subtle but profound. A mason, inspired by the school, proposed a new, more efficient design for building hearths in the commoners' quarters. A young guard, who had learned basic tactics from the history scrolls now available in the new small library Alara had started, devised a better patrol rotation. The kingdom was beginning to think, to innovate, from the bottom up. One evening, as Alara and Kaelin walked through the thriving Queen's garden, the air sweet with the scent of blooming herbs, he took her hand. "When I became king," he said quietly, "I believed my legacy would be written in the treaties I signed and the battles I won. I thought strength was something you demonstrated." He stopped and turned to her, his amber eyes reflecting the light of the rising moon. "You have shown me that the greatest strength is something you cultivate. These children, this garden, the new ideas flowing through the pack, this is our true legacy, Alara. This is the future you are building." Alara looked out at the peaceful, productive garden, hearing the distant, happy shouts of pups playing near the conservatory. The rejected Omega had not just found a place, she had planted a forest. She had taken the comp. Ashen that had once been deemed a weakness and had used it to sow the seeds of a brighter, stronger, and more compassionate tomorrow. And she knew that these seeds, nurtured by the love of their king and queen, would grow into a kingdom that would stand for 1,000 years. Chapter 14. The unbroken circle. The height of summer arrived, and with it, the festival of the first howl, the most sacred celebration in the northern calendar. It commemorated the founding of the Stormcrest line and the first pact between Wolf and Moon. This year, however, the festival held a new, profound significance. It was the first under the united reign of Kaelin and Alara, a celebration not just of history, but of a future reborn. The entire pack gathered in the great stone circle as the full moon rose, a colossal silver coin in the velvet sky. The air thrummed with a palpable energy, a mixture of ancient tradition and vibrant, new hope. Alara stood beside Kaelin, not in her formal velvet, but in a simple, pure white gown, a living symbol of the new beginning they had forged together. The ceremony was led by the eldest members of the pack, their voices weaving the old stories into the night. They spoke of the first Alpha, who had howled at the moon and received the gift of unity. They spoke of trials and triumphs, of winters survived and battles won. But tonight, the stories felt different. They felt like a prelude. When the time came for the Alpha King to speak, Kaelin stepped forward. His voice, powerful and clear, carried to every wolf present. "For generations, we have celebrated our strength. The strength of our warriors, the strength of our walls, the strength of our lineage." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. "But this past year, we learned a different kind of strength. We learned that a kingdom is not just defended by claws, but by compassion. It is not just ruled by law, but by love. It is not just led by a king, but made whole by his queen." He turned and held his hand out to Alara. She joined him, her hand slipping into his, the mate bond between them a visible, golden warmth in the moonlight that drew a soft, collective gasp from the pack. "Our story," Kaelin continued, his voice now filled with a deep, personal emotion, "began not on a battlefield, but in a blizzard. It began with an act of selfless courage from a wolf the world had cast aside. It was forged in mercy, tested by betrayal, and solidified by a shared vision for a kingdom where every wolf has value, and every voice can be heard." He looked down at her, his love for her shining brighter than the moon. Alara did not just save her king. She saved the soul of this kingdom. She reminded us who we are meant to be. Then, breaking with centuries of tradition where only the king howl. The oath of allegiance, Kaelin turned to Alara. My queen, will you howl with me? Will you lead this pack, our pack, into the future? Tears of joy streamed down Alara's face, but her voice was steady and strong as she answered, I will. Together, they tilted their heads back to the moon. And together, their voices rose in a single, harmonious howl. It was a sound of immense power, yet it was woven through with a gentle, unshakable compassion. It was the howl of a warrior and a healer, a king and a queen, two halves of a single, unbreakable spirit. The very air seemed to vibrate with the rightness of it. The pack, moved by a force deeper than tradition, joined the howl, their thousands of voices blending into one thunderous, joyous song that shook the stars. In that moment, under the witness of the moon, the circle was complete. The past and the future were joined. The strength of the king and the heart of the queen had become one, creating a new song for the Northern Territories, a song of unity that would echo through the ages. The circle, once broken by rejection and fear, was now unbroken, stronger and more beautiful than ever before. Chapter 15. A legacy of light years, like gentle seasons, flowed over the Northern Territories. The palace, once a symbol of stern power, had become a vibrant heart, its rhythms set by the laughter of children from the now flourishing Moonlight Academy and the quiet hum of industry from the ever-expanding Queen's Garden. The legacy of the rejected Omega and the Alpha King was no longer a story whispered in awe. It was the very fabric of their thriving reality. Alara walked through the Academy's courtyard, now a proper stone building thanks to the Masons' Guild. She was no longer the hesitant young woman of years past. A graceful authority rested on her shoulders, and the warmth in her eyes was now mingled with the wisdom of experience. She paused by an open doorway, listening to a lesson. A young teacher, a woman who had herself been in the very first class, was speaking. And so, Queen Alara showed us that true strength isn't about never being afraid, the teacher told her enraptured pupils. It's about being kind even when you are. It's about building a bigger table, not a higher wall. A smile touched Alara's lips. Her lessons had become their lessons. The seeds she had planted had taken deep root. She found Kalen where she often did in the afternoons, in the Queen's Garden, but he was not alone. He was kneeling by a raised herb bed, his large, capable hands gently guiding the smaller hands of a little girl. Their daughter, Lyra, named for the fierce commander who was now her proud godmother. The child had her father's storm-gray eyes and her mother's quiet intensity as she carefully patted soil around a seed L. Ing. And this one, Kalen was saying, his voice a soft rumble, is for calming fevers. Your mother taught me that. Like you taught her how to be brave, Papa? Little Lyra asked, looking up at him with utter faith. Kalen's gaze lifted, meeting Alara's across the garden. The love in his eyes was a constant, steady flame that had only grown brighter with time. No, my little wolf, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She was always brave. I just learned how to see it. He stood, lifting their daughter into his arms, and walked to meet Alara. The three of them stood together, a living portrait of the peace they had built. The kingdom was at peace, its borders secure, its people prosperous and united. The challenges of kingship remained, but they faced them now as a team, their complementary strengths making every burden lighter. That evening, they stood on their balcony, watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of rose and gold. The sounds of a contented pack, families settling in for the night, the distant song of a minstrel, floated up to them. Do you ever think of it? Kalen asked softly, his arm around her shoulders. The cave? The blizzard? Every day, Alara replied, leaning into his strength. Not with pain, but with gratitude. That was the night I was truly found. Not just by you, but by myself. She looked out at their kingdom, bathed in the gentle twilight. The rejected Omega everyone saw as worthless, she just had a different kind of value. A value that couldn't be measured in status or power, but in the light she could bring to the shadows. Kalen turned her to face him, his expression solemn and full of awe. You didn't just bring light to my shadows, Alara. You brought it to an entire kingdom. You showed us that the greatest power isn't in dominating others, but in empowering them. Our story began with a dying wolf and a broken heart. But it will be remembered for the life and the love that grew from that night. As the first stars appeared, mirroring the countless lights now glowing in the windows of their pack below, Alara knew their work was a timeless one. It was not about a single victory or a finished project. It was about tending the garden, teaching the children, and holding fast to the belief that every wolf, no matter how humble their beginning, carried a spark of divine light. The rejected Omega had become a queen, not by conquering a throne, but by healing a kingdom with the one thing she'd always possessed, a compassionate heart. And her legacy, woven into the soul of the North, would forever be a testament to a simple, profound truth: that sometimes, the greatest strength is found not in the claw that strikes, but in the hand that heals. Theirs was a legacy of light, and it would shine on, long after they were gone, a beacon of hope for all eternity. Like, subscribe, and comment for part 2.